Hey, it's Justin Harvey. Thanks for tuning into the Anesthesia and Pain Management Success podcast. With APM Success, we take a close look at important topics pertaining to business, practice management, personal finance, and careers for anesthesiologists and pain management physicians. We work hard to take your critical questions straight to the experts. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to another episode of APM Success. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Dr. Yash Navalgund, who is an interventional pain doc with extensive experience in the business of medicine. He's currently the Chief Medical Officer at National Spine and Pain Centers. He has run and sold pain practices and surgery centers. He participates in a number of medical-related businesses. I saw him at a panel conversation at the recent Aspen conference, and I'm really excited to be speaking with him today. Welcome, Dr. Navalgund.
Thanks, Justin. Appreciate the time.
For starters, why don't you give our listeners a sense of the scope of your current interests and responsibilities as a physician and an executive?
Yeah, so as Chief Medical Officer of the largest pain management platform in the United States at National Spine and Pain Centers, my oversight is over 100 centers across 12 states. Various responsibilities. Some of those responsibilities are things that I was told I would be responsible for, and some of them I just have fallen into my lap and I've now become responsible for. But for the most part, it is to try to keep the platform together, keep the physicians sort of aligned with the single mission and single goal for the organization.
For someone who has your current job description, I would surmise that along the way, and this is the interesting thing about the journey of executives in general, but this is, I think, particularly true in medicine. You start out with a certain skill set, like a strictly clinical skill set, really, when you're a 30-something pain doctor. And then eventually there's a whole new world of like leadership and business acumen skill sets that need to be developed. So tell us a little bit about your journey. And there tends to be these like inflection points of like, in order to get that job, I needed to do a whole new set of things that I had never even known existed. So tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so I think one of the more common things that I tell younger folks kind of looking at this as a future is that I can sum up my entire life in a single sentence. It didn't go as planned. So, so with that, it started out, like every other fellow with lots of ambition. My goals were to sort of enter into the pain management space with a splash. I was very fortunate in my fellowship at West Virginia University to have a strong training in implantation of spinal cord stimulators and other more advanced procedures. And as such, I thought that, hey, as soon as I come out, I'm gonna open up my practice and just take off in the pain space. But what was really interesting is that during my fellowship and even my residency, I met up with, at the time, a very strong and prominent neurosurgery group that was in private practice in the Pittsburgh area. And during my residency, I was promised sort of the sky and the stars. And that was, as soon as you're done with your fellowship, you're going to come and we're going to work together in this private setting, and everything's going to be rainbows and unicorns. And 6 months went by, kind of touched base with them. No, your agreement is so special and so unique that it's taking us some time to piece this together. Now it's February of my fellowship year, and finally I get a memo and says, hey, we need to meet. So I do, and only to find out that a hospital system had purchased this group. And now it's February, and I was hanging my hat on this opportunity. And it turns out that now they were offering me an employment position in a hospital system. So it kind of flipped the tables on me. It was a tough decision to stand up at the end of that meeting and, thank them and walk away from this. But the problem is now we're into March of my fellowship year, and I finish in July, and I don't have a job. And so, as most naive young fellows would imagine, I just thought, well, how hard could it be? Let me just go ahead and open up a practice and I'll do it myself. And so the rest was history. Uh, I was fortunate I was able to sort of pursue this with my wife, who was doing her fellowship at the same time. And we opened up our practice now. I borrowed some money from PNC Bank, not knowing anything about formal structural business plan. I was able to work with a local college that worked with the SBDC, or Small Business Development Centers, and they offered a opportunity to create a business plan, and I did, and I started to learn sort of the basics, the elementary basics of what a business plan is and why you need to do that. Use that plan to land a deal with PNC Bank at the time. Actually, they were able to fund it, and things were slow at the start, but once they started to take off, it got very, very interesting. And when I say interesting, it's because new opportunities started popping up. PNC actually featured me within their organization as one of their success stories for cash flow management products that they had available. I ended up on the back of JAMA and New England Journal and a few other magazines and advertisements for PNC, and that's when I started realizing, wow, there's a whole nother world out there that has nothing to do with practicing medicine, but it really was about branding, and it was about brand recognition, and really sort of highlighting yourself in the space. And so that's really where the sort of the roots of the practice started, and was fortunately able to get involved in a couple of great deals with ambulatory surgery center development, things like that. So again, they were all sort of plug on type of additions to the pain practice.
In the typical entrepreneur's journey, there's this part of the journey that is colloquially known as the Valley of Despair, usually somewhere between 6 and 18 months after launch, where the enthusiasm and the honeymoon phase has ended, your bills are all starting to hit, revenue cycle hasn't really picked up yet, and you're left with that, oh my gosh, what the heck did I get myself into moment. I'm curious if you and your wife, experienced anything along those lines.
Yeah, actually, just around that first year, in October, we saw a blip of positivity, which was about $9. Uh, that was after paying the bills, and and then it hit me, and I thought, did we just work for the last 4 months to pick up $9? Is this what this is all about? And yeah, that was there, but I think part of it was sort of had a goal in mind. We had a vision of what an ideal pain practice would look like. And that was again back in the 2003 range, 2004. And it was the sort of the beginnings of the opioid crisis. And we came in with a different attitude. We came in with a much different attitude than prior physicians in our same space. And that was that we were going to approach this with sort of non-opioid interventional tactics, things like that. And in doing so, we ran into a few hiccups. One was referring physicians at the time were used to pain doctors as the ones that they could refer to for opioid prescribing, for instance. And we were the most unpopular group in the area. While we were new, there was a lot of buzz about the new group. The new group didn't prescribe opioids. And so there was a huge lull for about a year and a half in which people would just not refer to us. But as fortune had it, as these individuals weren't getting better with the treatments they were getting, they ultimately did end up on our lap and things started to improve. So I would say we probably had an ill feeling for a good 2 years at the very beginning. But having that mission, having that sort of passion to stay in that same lane, really paid off in the long run.
And then it sounds like as your uh, throughput accelerated, your awareness and vision pretty quickly began to expand. You mentioned the idea of brand. I think that's a really important idea, especially in this day and age for physicians, especially in pain management. And even just understanding the business model where you can plug in surgery centers and the different reimbursement associated with that. And tell me a little bit about how you, I'm sure back in 2003, 4, and 5, they weren't covering these concepts in your residency and fellowship program. So how did you begin to assemble a professional team, educate yourself, get exposed to resources and mentorship that enabled you to do these big, sort of complicated ideas and integrate them into your practice?
Well, there's some beauty in being naive in that you can have these idealistic visions and sort of go for it. But you're right. There was not a whole lot of training and education that would give us the opportunity to even understand what's out there. What's interesting is that you fast forward 20 years later, and I still think we're very weak in that space. We do have large societies and conferences as the one we met that are now pushing a lot of this information out to the end users. But at that time, it certainly was completely out of the question. Yeah, so I think it was very fortunate for me as far as opportunities arising during that time because there was a surgery center group that actually came to me and said, you know, we'd like to open up an ambulatory surgery center and we'd like you to be part of it. And of course, at the time, I didn't have much understanding other than, sure, I can make money with some equity and those types of things associated with it. What they did was is they actually brought not only my group, but they brought a few other groups together that were pain and not pain related. So it was a multi-specialty ambulatory surgery center deal. And what I learned very quickly was just how these interactions work between orthopedic spine, neurosurgery, podiatry, ophthalmology, GI, and how all these groups can sort of interact together in a joint venture that can be very, very lucrative. What it also taught me was, again, with some guidance and supervision from an organization that did this predominantly as their main business, was that ownership interest in these things really um, helps grow your business, but it also helps create these relationships with these other potential referral sources. And on top of it, it really helps you understand that large ownership positions in these surgery centers is not the goal as much as having a group of positions that generate larger amounts of money, and having smaller percentage of larger amounts of money makes a whole lot more sense than trying to just be the one that's putting all the work and effort into to driving the revenue. So it really opened my eyes to the potential. And I think it was there that I started to realize, well, if we can do this with one, why not two? And so kind of grew the business to two ambulatory centers with multi-specialty ambulatory surgery centers, and then 7 locations for the business.
That's a really important concept. And I'm a big believer in physicians, pain particular, like having the surgery center as a component of their practice in order to fully monetize their clinical efforts. But surgery centers are not a homogenous group. They are widely varied, obviously. This is at least obvious, to you and I, but to some of our listeners, I think, all right, finish fellowship, get into a practice, make sure I got the surgery center happening. I think you made a great point that the point isn't to have the biggest slice of the pie. It's to be part of a successful business and to get some profits from that business. So talk a little bit about how you think about due diligence in looking at these opportunities and how sort of that lesson really codified for you.
Yeah, so I think what ended up happening was is that I sort of watched how this particular organization sort of pieced the group together. And at first, when they had brought up the idea of another pain management group, the instinct part of me was really more or less, do I really want a competitor in here? Is this, what am I talking, what are we talking about here? And so, but what I learned very, very quickly was that not only was it beneficial to have the competitor present, but it created an atmosphere with the competitor that maybe if we were working together, we can actually have a greater blueprint, a footprint, I should say, over the region. And so we actually started to work together and sort of divide and conquer the region, and it actually helped both of our businesses grow. So using that same sort of concept, I applied it towards my additional office locations, looked at what the referral patterns were like, and sort of built the model around strategic offices, not just to have more offices, but to have each office bring something more to the table than three offices, than four offices, than five offices. And so to use that same strategy from a referral perspective as well.
That question that I asked earlier about building that skill set that right now you're exercising in spades at NSPC, I can see that it does go back to the very beginning here in terms of multi-site considerations. Talk about going from one to two and the things you had to learn, the mistakes you made. What was the journey like to open that first? You get your hub, and then you're starting to think about a geographic footprint and getting the spokes out there. How did that develop for you?
Yeah, I think the I'll start with the greatest challenge. We have a tendency to think that just because we did it right once, that if you do it again, it'll be right the second time. And I think sometimes we got to step back and understand our own operations. There were things that were intuitive in my hub site that weren't as intuitive as we hired additional people in the second site. And so I failed to create what we should consider more integration. What I tried to do was just sort of open a second site, do everything exactly the same, and then expect everyone to know that you're supposed to do it this way. I didn't actually have a champion from my hub site to be the one that stays at this new location, convey the workflow, convey the sort of systems that have been put in place. And I didn't evaluate where redundancy was necessary and where redundancy wasn't necessary. So I almost set up a second site that was as costly as the first site, which has really no long-term value because now I'm basically twice as expensive. And even if I'm making twice as much money, I'm really not clearing the same margin.
Yeah.
And so that was just poor integration of the second site. But that lesson was a hard lesson because just like that first 18, 24 months was so painful, I didn't want to go down another 2-year path of that same pain. I very quickly made those adjustments. And then the third site was so much easier because we knew ahead of time the things that we needed to plan for and prepare for.
Was talking recently with another guest on the podcast about turnover and culture and the link between this intangible thing, the culture of a practice, of a business, of people feeling cared for and cared about, and then decreased turnover, increased productivity, increased patient experience, and this virtual cycle that is created. Talk a little bit about your experience of culture and how you did you think about it at all? How did you? Because usually it's you kind of just got to start going in business. You're like, we need to pay the bills, we need to make money, we need that. We're looking at the KPIs, the quantifiable throughput. But eventually, you're like, okay, are people happy at work? Are we having turnover problems, which is very expensive? You got to recruit and retain and then retrain, and that it's this whole thing. So, talk about your sort of journey of understanding culture and then trying to create healthy culture amongst your practices.
I've always been very much two things that were important for me in practice. One, customer service, so that the forward facing from the customer side, that they're getting the best experience possible. And then internal culture, which I thought I did a fairly good job with our first site. But as you're bringing this up, I think the biggest thing that I failed to integrate was that culture into the second site. In fact, I didn't even realize I was developing culture as we were developing that first site. I was just thinking, gosh, everyone is so happy to be here. I've got the most loyal employees. They go out of their way this is great. I just hire a bunch of more people and put them in a new location and they're going to behave the same way. But it really turned into almost Tale of Two Cities.
Hmm.
I've got this one site where no one wants to come to work. And I've got this other site where everyone loves to work. Then I've got employees from the second site saying, why can't we work at the other site? And so that was the rude awakening that made me realize that, part of integration is not just the EMR system, not just the billing system or the phone system. Part of that is also integrating the culture. And again, having a champion that can carry that over to the other side.
Can you get, and culture is so, it's challenging because it's not strictly quantifiable in most of the traditional ways. But can you give maybe one or two tangible pearls for someone who's wants to sort of up their game in terms of culture? It feels like people aren't productive at work. It feels like the person at the front desk, they don't look very happy. When the patient walks in, it's like an imposition on that person's time. Talk a little bit about what are a couple sort of actionable items for a practice owning physician who wants to begin to turn the ship in this department.
Yeah, I think, when you look at any really good parents, okay, you find that, the kids sort of take context clues from their parents, and then their overall behavior is sort of a reflection of how things are at home. I think it really holds true in the workplace as well. If you show up at work, you're the leader of that ship. You show up to work frazzled. You show up to work at the last second before the first patient's walking through the door. You show up to work on your phone, having a conversation with someone else, ignoring the staff as they come in. I think it ultimately does sort of bring the culture and the morale of the employees down. And so I think for me, I always made it a point that how I appear in the office that day, regardless of what was happening, it could have been utter chaos. Kid could have missed the bus stop and I had to drive them to school and race over to work. It could have been any number of things. But I just take 10 seconds in the car and then I walk in, smile on my face, ask everyone how they're doing. Is there anything I can do for you? Try to show up 15 minutes before I'm supposed to be there, have sort of that morning chat with everyone. I think just little things like that changes the entire mood of the day for those employees. They also feel like you're accessible, and then they don't feel like necessarily catching me at any moment they can, but they know that I'll be there in the morning and they can reserve some of their questions for that time when I'm there. And so that changed the whole sort of demeanor. Now, again, as we hired new individuals, position wise, I had to make sure that in those locations that they were doing the same thing, because then it would be it's only when I'm there that everything was fine, and when someone else comes in, it doesn't necessarily work that way. And you can't do that. And that brings me to the bigger point, and that is, what's the reason you're in practice? It's okay. People get so worried about, well, I want to build a practice so that I can scale it and sell it. And my answer is more power to you. But what are you selling? And sort of now being in the role I'm in, I have an opportunity to kind of see what the buyer's side looks like, not so much just the seller side. And we all think that if we bring in a ton of money, our practice is worth a lot. But what the missing sort of part of that recipe is your practice is not just worth the money you're bringing in. Your practice is worth how easily you can be imported or integrated into a larger system. Do you have your books in order? Do you have your fancy car as part of the business expenses that have to be removed from those accounting documents and things like that? Or do you really have an easy to integrate practice? And that's a challenge sometimes. Also, culture drives value. If I have a practice that really focuses on the well-being of the employees, the customer service side, a buyer's willing to pay for that additional value, not just the money it's coming in, but you almost have to look at it as buying or selling a house. If you've got a house that's freshly painted and ready to move in, it's easier for the buyer to do what they need to do, right? But if you've got a house that's going to require some landscaping work, and the buyer's going to look at that and say, how much work do I need to put into this to make it fit what I'm looking for? And that really substantially devalues a business. So while it might be perfect for you and it's generating money for you and it's great for your lifestyle, you have to really look at whether your business is going to be good for someone else's sort of mission.
I would also surmise that the emotional muscles that you're talking about building in order to be present for your coworkers, emotionally present, not just physically, that actually maps on quite nicely to the patient experience as well. And you're not showing up into the exam room frazzled, stressed, and projecting that onto your
Exactly.
patient.
It's very much so.
Um, so, somewhere along the journey, you started to probably understand that there are other capital participants in practices, surgery centers. Talk a little bit about sort of your journey of understanding business deals, deal structure, other stakeholders, how you build alliances, how you build trust, how you do some due diligence on other people who are going to be investing in your practice or inviting you to co-invest. How has your journey matured in that department?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that really stands out in terms of due diligence is that at first I had a few opportunities on the ambulatory surgery side that they came in and had some ideas such as, we're going to take over 51% of your ambulatory surgery center, help you take money off the table. This is going to be great. And then I had to go back to all of the investors. And, I've got multi-specialty centers with orthopedics, podiatry, GI, ophthalmology, and trying to convince them that, hey, this may be an opportunity or a good deal. Um, all the numbers looked good, but I hadn't done sufficient due diligence on these potential buyers. So that was what was nice about working with a multi-specialty group is just because, I always feel like there's no way I can succeed if I'm the smartest person in the room. I always want to be surrounded by somebody and some people that have more knowledge than I do or have more experience than I do. It's hard. It's hard to like suppress that ego because you always feel like, well, this was my idea and this was my, and that's great. But the problem with your ideas is that they can only grow to a certain size. If you don't have that sort of outside vision helping you, you're not going to develop and grow. So one of the things they brought up as they started to discuss this was, hey, maybe we should start tapping into others that have gone through deals with these individuals. And I thought, yeah, not a bad idea. So I asked them for the list of their deals that they've done recently and to connect with a variety of them. In fact, we even dug up deals that they didn't bring up and we went directly to those individuals and said, how's your experience? The first round was not as positive. We had a lot of negative feedback. And so we kind of decided, hey, maybe that's not the best partner that we want to work with. Fortunately, around the third deal, it made a lot of sense, as well as, again, reputation is everything. And it comes back to that branding concept we talked about earlier. I don't consider myself some big shot, rich guy who made a great deal and can walk away. But rather, I view myself as somebody that's been able to build a reputation over time. And what I have is my word, and my reputation is my word. And so I look for partners that have the same vision. And we were fortunate enough to find that. So I think when it comes to due diligence, one is it's easy to say due diligence, like what you need to do for due diligence and that. But I think if you can surround yourself with a few people that are also aligned in the same way and sort of share ideas about what you think due diligence should look like.
Something that I mentioned in the episode last week, we have this saying, the long game is the only game, that sometimes we bandy about here at APM Wealth. And I was talking to an investment banker who helped physicians monetize their practices. And whenever you're really in the business sense marrying a capital partner, you want to think about, are these people of a certain character that 5, 7, 10 years from now, especially for you at that time, Dr. Navalgund, who is 30 something or early 40s, whenever this time was, like, you've got a lot of tread left on the tires. You're not going to cash out and ride off into the sunset. You're going to keep on doing this for decades. You want to make sure that those relationships are thoroughly vetted and that there's probably some, personal connection and a shared value, not just the best deal sheet possible,
Sure.
but philosophical alignment that's going to allow you to continue to, walk the same road with somebody for a long time and feel good about it.
No question about it. I think that sometimes we sort of lose ourselves in numbers and sort of find ourselves on the wrong path and chasing the wrong thing. I think the idea is creating longevity by way of reputation, by way of branding, by way of trust. Really is the best route.
Can you talk about how this journey, as your influence and footprint expands and your reputation, you continue to do what you say you're going to do and be somebody that people want to be around, it creates other opportunities for you, probably more than you want to even be able to consider. So talk about how that has unfolded for you over the years and how you think about new business opportunities and new partnerships.
Yeah, so that's a lot of fun to discuss, and for various reasons. But there are two arms that I think really took off as a result of being able to be in business for myself. The first arm was the medical legal sort of expert witness arm, which I was able to use the reputation as well as the branding to sort of develop. The second was in the training and education side, I was able to develop a company called National Bioskills Laboratories, which is headquartered out of Dallas, Texas. With National Bioskills, which is a group of cadaver training centers, what I had found is that I started to get involved with a lot of device manufacturers on the training and education side. One of my passions was always taking young physicians and really simplifying complex concepts within spinal cord stimulation or implantable spinal spacers and this type of things. And so as part of that, I would go on a road show with some of the vendors and help train some of the young physicians. What I realized was they were all sort of training in facilities that were no one paid attention to the facility. They were so focused on training on the device that it may have been basement, concrete kind of, locations where they would do the training. At the same time, around 2009-ish, there was a tremendous push from regulatory agencies, regulatory bodies like the Department of Justice, Office of Inspector General. They're really pushing physicians away from creating vendor-physician relationships. And I think that had its purpose and its goals. And I think it's important that there should be an arm's length distance. But at the same time, I think it hurt the specialty, not only in pain, but other specialties as well, particularly orthopedics and neurosurgery, products were being developed faster than the education system could even keep up with. And so if you didn't have sort of this training and education, those types of things, then you would fall behind. Or if that impression of the government was that you're creating and fostering these relationships, then physicians would shy away from engaging in these trainings, which was, I think, terrible for our specialty and other surgical specialties as well. So I had this crazy idea that maybe if I created a warmer, more welcoming environment for training and education, that these companies would enjoy the fact that they can have these one-on-one encounters with their physicians, but at the same time, the physicians would benefit from a warm and welcoming environment and be able to learn these new products. So that really drove, again, the mission was just to create ideal settings for training and education. It was wildly popular by a number of large Fortune 500 companies, and even today continues with a lot of orthopedics, spine-related stuff, podiatry, pain management, other things like that. So being in the space, knowing the gaps, and then utilizing what I know kind of inside information, and then creating a product that was usable and sustainable. Now, the big difference when I developed National BioSkills was knowing from the beginning that I needed to have an infrastructure that included a proper management team, a sales team, all things I didn't know when I started my practice. Branding came right out of the gates. I actually made sure that I had the right colors chosen for branding. I had to, there were so many other factors involved. So having that practice startup experience was the best thing that could have happened to National BioSkills in terms of the ground up. Now, on the medical, legal, expert witness side, that was something that I was always a bit fond of. Interestingly enough, my wife as my partner was not as fond of. And I think there's two types of people. There are people that don't mind sitting under that interrogation light and answering questions. There are some that just can't wait to do it. Okay. And for me, again, part of it was ego, part of it was, I know this stuff well, so what am I afraid of? Those types of things. And so what I did was I actually just at the time just kind of flipped through some local names of attorneys, both plaintiff and defense attorneys. I offered to take them out to dinner if they could help me understand the space. They loved it, one, because most physicians get asked to do these things and then through trial and error kind of figure out what they need to do. But this physician was asking them point blank, like, what do I need to do to understand this space? And so they gave me both defense sort of pointers and plaintiff pointers, and kind of work that relationship through them. And then when I had cases that were even related to them, I would ask them about how do I approach it. And so they became essentially mentors, which, again, I can't emphasize the value of finding the right people and the right mentors, but that I actually had a couple of attorneys be my mentors through this process. Mm. And what it quickly taught me is that even in the expert witness space, there are the plaintiff guys and the defense guys. But for me, I'm neither, right? I'm just the sort of unbiased, and I love it because when I'm deposed and I have certain attorneys will ask me if I'm doing a defense case, for instance, they'll ask me, how many times do you do this? I say hundreds, but about half of them are defense and half of them are plaintiff. So it doesn't give them any leverage to say I'm one or the other. And so again, back to reputation, branding, being able to sort of recognize that even though you might have branding, sometimes bad branding is not exactly what you want either. So you want to have, even in that expert witness space, to sort of lean towards one or the other. And so I think overall, um, I owe it all to sort of sink or swim going in and starting this medical practice.
As someone who has started many successful businesses, you've probably had a couple swings and misses somewhere along the line. Curious, like the worst investment you ever made, or something that was a waste of time or a waste of money, and you're like, yeah, I should have thought twice about that one. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, so what I realized was I'm pretty good at ground up concepts because I have a bit of control over how things are going to end up. What I'm not good at, and it's just because sometimes you don't know the right due diligence, you don't know the details, is when others pitch or offer ideas and say, I'm going to do this. Can you invest in it? Okay. And so at the beginning, and I want to preface by saying, um, I'm such a huge advocate and fan of having a fiduciary financial advisor. Absolutely. I mean, I don't, I can't emphasize enough. I had originally felt that a financial advisor was someone who was going to teach me how to make money. Then I realized that that's somebody who's teaching me how to protect my money. And so that's a whole nother concept. But with respect to the ideas that we're just discussing, I think it's important that um, you you try to bounce again these investment opportunities and things off of a advisor because they're not going to tell you don't invest in it, but they may be wise enough to say, by the way, based on your current nest egg, this is the disposable income that you can risk in order to invest. I didn't do that at the beginning. I thought I could earn forever and it didn't matter and I'd just make more money later and those types of things. And so I've invested in several really fantastic concepts, but the execution was so poor because I didn't do enough due diligence on the individuals that were involved in it. Other types of quote bad investments have been even in the healthcare space. I had a number of physicians that owned their own um, medical office buildings and said, "Hey, get in on this real estate deal, get in on, one thing or another." And so again, not enough due diligence, didn't understand who was running the operation and didn't bring someone else in to help me with the due diligence. And I think now it's interesting. I have clearly more income and more savings than I did at that time, but I'm way more cautious now having been burned so many times. So again, I would say having the right advisor to help, let's call it, protect your money. It's your ideas that are going to grow the money. That's fine, but you really have to protect that money.
For our listeners who aren't watching the YouTube channel, I'm here nodding vigorously, saying yes, 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 yes. Um, in closing, I want to wrap this up, and I appreciate your time here, Dr. Navalgund.
Of course.
For physicians who are listening, who are earlier on in their journey and want to replicate your success, what other decisions or like ways you've positioned mentors in your life, or what other things do you identify as a real catalyst for your forward progress and ultimate, being able to succeed on so many different fronts?
Yeah, I think when you talk about catalysts, the ideal catalyst is obviously your mentors, and there's no question about it. And I have the utmost respect. In the hierarchy, my mentors are right there with my parents, and I think these are the folks that on the business side of your life are going to help you get to where you want to be. Um, some of the other things that I found is building that team. Um, people underestimate, just because I hired someone, it doesn't necessarily, make me superior or more knowledgeable. I only have hired individuals that actually know a subject matter better than I do. They may not understand the bigger picture of where I'm going or what I want to do with my business, and that comes with time. But they certainly are the subject matter experts. And I think that if I've learned anything along the way is that as I start to venture into businesses that I've started myself or businesses that need help, what I look at first is what does this sort of management structure look like? And if changes need to be made, make those harsh changes immediately so that that organization has a chance of that longevity that you were talking about.
I think it was Steve Jobs who famously said, "We don't hire smart people to tell them what to do. We hire smart people to tell us what to do."
That's
I just,
exactly right.
I just thought that made a lot of sense. Well, Dr. Navalgund, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us today on APM Success.
I appreciate the time and take care.
If you liked what you heard this week, head on over to apmsuccess.com, where you can find more content and free resources to help you build a successful career in anesthesia and pain management. If you wanted to leave a review in iTunes, I'd also really appreciate it. Thanks for using some of your valuable time to join me today on APM Success.